Have you ever made a choice in one night that changed the rest of your life, Doctor? Claire Whitmore wasn't supposed to be at that gala. She'd just come off a double shift in the ER, still smelled faintly of antiseptic, and wore a borrowed dress 2 sizes too big. Across the ballroom stood Graham Alden, a polished investor from New York with a family name as heavy as the legacy behind it. One conversation over pecan pie, one walk beneath holiday lights. That's all it took. Weeks later, Claire stood alone in a hospital bathroom, staring at 2 pink lines that would rewrite her life. What would you do if you were carrying more than a secret, but 2 heartbeats? Tell him or protect your peace? As Claire prepared to face motherhood without promises, and Graham searched for the courage to become more than the man he was raised to be, one unexpected gift would return from someone nearly forgotten, proving that kindness never leaves quietly. If you've ever wondered whether one night, one decision, one quiet act of love can echo through generations, stay with us. This is a story about judgment, grace, and the ways we show up, especially when no one's watching. Because sometimes, the smallest choices carry the loudest truths. Dr. Claire Whitmore didn't belong in places like this, but somehow, that night, the ballroom made room for her. The Middleton Hotel sparkled in a way that felt almost theatrical. Charleston's winter was never harsh, but the air held a gentle bite as guests in velvet and wool stepped through the grand entrance beneath garlands of pine and gold ribbon. Claire hesitated just outside the double doors, adjusting the hem of a black satin dress that wasn't hers. "It doesn't look borrowed," Lena murmured, looping her arm through Claire's. "It looks like it was made for you." Claire offered a tight smile. "Maybe. Still feels like I'm wearing someone else's confidence." Inside, the lobby buzzed with soft laughter and the clinking of glasses. A string quartet played a jazz rendition of "O Holy Night," and the scent of cinnamon and evergreen filled the space. The ballroom shimmered beyond a pair of tall, white-paneled doors. Claire drew a breath. She had only agreed to attend as a favor, never expecting the man beside the chocolate fountain would turn her life upside down. They entered together, Lena immediately catching the eye of a board member and floating into conversation. Claire stayed near the entrance, pretending to study the floral arrangements. She counted 3 poinsettias, 4 mistletoe clusters, and more sequins than she'd ever seen in one room. Her heels pinched. She didn't notice him. At first, Graham Alden was standing near the dessert table, his posture detached, as if the party unfolded behind glass. His tailored charcoal suit blended into the dim lighting, but his expression stood out, focused, almost bored, until it softened slightly when his gaze found the pecan pie. Claire approached, drawn more by the familiarity of dessert than company. "They say the pie comes from Grafton's on King Street," she said softly, almost to herself. Graham glanced over. "Is that supposed to be impressive?" She smiled. "Only if you've ever waited in line outside that place on a Sunday." There was a pause, just long enough to notice the contrast between them. Her simple bun, his impeccable cufflinks. Then he said, "I take it you have more than once. I'm a doctor at St. Mercy. So Sundays off are rare. But Grafton's pecan pie is worth the sleep deprivation." He considered this. "I've had their bourbon peach, but not the pecan. You're missing out." Another pause, but not awkward, curious, a few feet away. Someone popped open a bottle of champagne with a theatrical cheer. Graham ignored it. "Doctor?" he asked. "Claire Whitmore," she replied. "Emergency department. And no, I don't usually attend galas." "Graham Alden?" he said, finance, and I don't usually talk about pie." She laughed, surprising them both. Big night. Then, they stood together as the quartet transitioned into Have Yourself a Merry Little Christmas. Graham gestured toward a quieter corner near the tall windows. Claire followed, relieved to step away from the swirl of donors and speeches. The Charleston lights glowed softly beyond the glass, casting silhouettes of garland-wrapped lampposts. The scent of pine mingled with pastry and perfume. Graham shifted, folding his arms. "You really don't like it here," he said. Claire hesitated. "I appreciate the cause, but I just came off a double shift, and I can still smell antiseptic on my skin. Everyone here looks like they stepped out of a catalog." "You look fine," he said, then corrected himself. "More than fine." She tilted her head. "Do you always flirt at fundraisers? Only with women who know the difference between pie vendors?" She smiled again, softer this time. Her shoulders relaxed. "What about you?" "Not a fan of gala season. I'm only here because my father co-chairs the hospital foundation. I'd rather be home with takeout and no tie. Then we already have something in common." Outside, a breeze swept through the magnolia trees, making the windows shiver slightly. Graham glanced at the ballroom, then back at Claire. "Do you want to walk out for a bit?" Get some air, they stepped onto the terrace, the quiet broken only by the faint sound of jazz and the rustle of leaves. Claire wrapped her arms around herself as they strolled along the path lit with fairy lights. "So," Graham asked, "what's the best and worst part of working in the ER?" She thought for a moment. "The best is when you know, without a doubt, you've made a difference, saved a life, calmed someone in crisis. The worst is when that's not enough." His expression shifted, more thoughtful than before. "That's honest." She looked up at him. "I've learned not to waste time on anything else." They reached the end of the terrace, stopping near a bench overlooking the city rooftops. Graham rubbed the back of his neck. "My mother was a nurse," he said. "We lost her 5 years ago. She used to say the hardest part wasn't the medicine, it was pretending she didn't care too much." Claire nodded slowly. "That's exactly it." They stood in silence for a moment. The wind picked up, sending a few dry leaves skittering across the path. As they say goodnight, Claire shivers. Graham offers his coat and lingers, just a second too long. The glitter of the gala faded fast, but in the quiet of Rosie's diner, something else began to glow. The diner door creaked open with a metallic chime as Claire stepped in, letting the warm scent of bacon grease, cinnamon, and overbrewed coffee wrap around her like an old quilt. Graham held the door behind her, then followed, nodding politely to the waitress behind the counter. Christmas lights dangled from the ceiling, their colors soft and worn like memories. Rosie's was nearly empty at that hour, just a couple in their 70s, sharing a piece of cherry pie in the corner, and a man reading a newspaper folded into neat halves at the bar. A jukebox hummed quietly, half-heartedly playing Have Yourself a Merry Little Christmas. They'd escaped the party crowd, but not each other's pull. Claire slid into a red vinyl booth near the window. The seat was cracked at the corner, patched with silver duct tape. Graham sat across from her, removing his coat and folding it beside him. He looked different under the diner lights, less composed, more reachable. She felt herself exhale, the tension from the ballroom finally settling. Ruby appeared with a coffee pot in hand, her white hair pulled into a no-nonsense bun. Her name tag was worn, and her smile looked like it had seen decades of holiday nights like this one. "Well now," she said, pouring coffee into both cups without asking. "A suit and a stethoscope. I've seen stranger pairings, but not many prettier. Claire laughed under her breath. Graham offered a half smile. Ruby leaned on one hip and nodded at them. Y'all hungry or just here for my famous conversation? Do you still have pecan pie? Claire asked. Ruby winked. For you, darlin', always. She turned to Graham. And you, sugar, I'll have what she's having, he said, surprising even himself. As Ruby walked off, Graham leaned back, running a hand through his hair. So, he began, how do you unwind after patching people up all day? Claire wrapped her hands around the coffee mug, eyes focused on the steam. I bake, she said, mostly pies. I think it's the precision it calms me. That's unexpected. She smiled without looking up. Most of me is... He nodded thoughtfully. My mother used to say baking is therapy. You can eat. Claire's smile faded, just a little. She's gone 5 years this spring. Cancer. He didn't elaborate, and she didn't push. Ruby returned with 2 slices of warm pecan pie topped with melting whipped cream. She placed them down gently, like she was setting something sacred. On the house tonight, she said. Consider it a Christmas gift. Thank you, Claire said softly. As they ate, the conversation turned quieter. Claire shared a story about a young boy she'd treated that week, how he'd given her a candy cane after she stitched up his forehead. Graham chuckled and talked about his mother's insistence on decorating every corner of the house, even the laundry room. She used to hum carols while folding socks, he said, stirring his coffee. It drove my dad nuts. Claire watched him with soft eyes. You talk about her like she's still here. She is, he said after a pause, in small ways. A silence settled over them, not uncomfortable, but full. Ruby passed by again and muttered, mostly to herself, You two don't look like strangers. Claire glanced at Graham, then away. I don't date, she said suddenly. Graham looked up. Wasn't assuming you did. I mean, I don't usually do this. She gestured to the booth. The pie, the hour. It's not my style. He nodded. It's not mine either. Then added, but I'm still here. That hung in the air a moment. Claire picked at her crust, unsure what to do with that kind of honesty. He didn't press, didn't lean forward or try to make it something bigger. He just drank his coffee and waited. The clock over the register read nearly midnight when they finally stood to leave. Outside. The air had cooled further, the sidewalk was damp from an earlier drizzle, and the lights on King Street twinkled above them, like watchful stars. They walked side by side without speaking, their footsteps falling into quiet rhythm. The city had emptied. Save for the occasional passing car or flicker of porch light behind closed curtains. At her apartment steps, Claire stopped. She turned, unsure whether to say something or just let the moment drift into silence. Graham looked at her, hands in his coat pockets. Tonight wasn't planned, but it felt right. Claire didn't respond, just nodded. She watched him walk away, his figure disappearing into the quiet street, framed by Christmas lights and still air. In the morning, when she reached into her coat pocket for her keys, her fingers brushed against something folded. She finds a note in her coat pocket the next morning. Thank you for being real. 2 pink lines, 1 breath held. Everything changed. The fluorescent light above the hospital restroom flickered once, then held steady. Claire sat on the closed toilet lid, elbows on her knees, forehead resting in her palms as the plastic stick lay silently on the sink beside her. The 2 lines stared back at her, clear as sunrise. Outside, the break room door opened and closed with its usual squeaky protest. The muffled buzz of vending machines filled the hallway. Claire didn't move. Her breath had gone shallow, her fingers cold. She had pushed the night from her mind until her body whispered it back. Someone knocked gently. Claire Lena's voice, laced with concern and caffeine. "You've been in there a while." Claire cleared her throat. "One sec." Her voice came out steady. That surprised her. She rose, tucked the test into the side pocket of her scrubs, and splashed water on her face. Her reflection in the mirror looked pale, lips pressed thin, but her eyes were focused now. There wasn't time to fall apart. Not here. She stepped out, greeted by the familiar scent of burnt coffee and antibacterial soap. The Christmas tree in the corner drooped slightly, its lights unplugged, ornaments missing from the bottom third. A tin of stale cookies sat open on the counter, untouched since New Year's Eve. Lena was waiting near the window, arms crossed, gaze gentle but firm. "You okay?" Claire nodded too quickly. "Just tired." Lena tilted her head. "You want to tell me what's going on, or do I have to pull rank as your emotional support nurse?" Claire gave a breathy laugh. "It's nothing. It's mine to handle." "You sure I'm sure?" She wasn't, but she needed to be. At that moment, the overhead speaker crackled. Code gray. Main entrance. Code gray. Claire and Lena exchanged glances, instincts kicking in before questions could form. By the time Claire reached the ER's sliding glass doors, 2 security guards were guiding in a hunched figure wrapped in a damp army green coat. The woman looked disoriented, her gray curls plastered to her forehead. A small American flag pin gleamed beneath the collar of her coat, almost hidden. "I'm fine," the woman muttered, though her knees wobbled. "You're not," Claire said, stepping in. "Let's get you checked out." The woman's name, according to the ID in her coat, was May Hollander. Her fingers were calloused, her speech clipped but clear. She resisted the wheelchair until her knees gave way and Claire caught her arm. "You move like someone who's done this before," May said as she settled onto the chair. "Done what?" "Caught people who didn't want catching." Claire smiled faintly. Part of the job. As they wheeled her into triage, May reached over and squeezed Claire's hand. "You're a keeper," she said, her voice lower now, edged with something heavier. Claire didn't answer. Her heart ached in ways she hadn't expected. Later. When May was resting in an observation bed and Claire finally returned to the break room, she found it emptier than before. Jared, the night nurse, stood at the vending machine, shaking it like an arcade claw game. "Did you eat my peanut M&Ms?" he asked suspiciously. "I didn't touch your stash," Claire replied without looking up. "Then the machine's plotting against me." She half smiled, but her focus was elsewhere. Her hand slipped instinctively to her stomach, flat now. Ordinary, but already. Something had shifted, something real. She sat down at the tiny break room table, its surface covered in outdated magazines and a single wilted poinsettia. Placing her hands over her abdomen, she whispered, "I can do this. Not I want to. Not I plan to. Just, I can." A nurse walked in, carrying a small envelope with no return address. "Hey, Whitmore. Some guy dropped this off earlier. Said it was for you." Claire looked up sharply. "What guy didn't get a name? Said you'd know." The nurse left. Claire stared at the envelope, her hand frozen midair. A nurse drops off a sealed envelope. Guy dropped it off earlier. Said it was for you. Claire freezes. The letter was short, too short for everything Claire needed to say. She read it again, the paper softening at the creases, from how many times she'd unfolded it. Graham's handwriting was clean, deliberate. "Thank you for being real." Just 7 words, and none of them hinted at what she carried now. The note had felt warm the first time she read it. Now it felt insufficient. Rain tapped against her apartment window in a lazy rhythm. The radiator hissed in the corner. Claire sat at her small kitchen table, a chipped ceramic mug between her palms, the scent of peppermint tea rising like a fragile comfort. Outside, the sidewalk glistened with rainwater, Charleston's January drizzle soaking the world in grayscale. She turned the note over in her hand again and again. Tell him, not tell him. The question looped around her mind like the gospel station she kept playing low in the background. Soft voices singing of grace, of burdens shared, of light not yet seen. On the counter sat a half-written response, the ink trailing off after only a sentence. Graham, there's something She couldn't finish it. A knock pulled her back. She opened the door to find Lena holding a steaming thermos and a brown paper bag. "You looked like you needed soup," Lena said without preamble. Stepping inside, Claire cracked a small smile. "How bad do I look?" "Somewhere between overworked and haunted." Lena set the food down and plopped onto the couch. "I brought sweet rolls too, the kind with the sticky bottom. Bribery, obviously." Claire sat beside her, grateful for the heat radiating from the thermos. She didn't speak right away. Lena didn't push. Finally, Claire said, "What if you had something to tell someone, but telling them might change everything, and not in a good way?" Lena considered that. "Then you ask yourself why you want to tell them. If it's for you, that's one thing. If it's for them, that's another." Claire nodded slowly, unsure which answer she was leaning toward. Later that day, after a short shift checking charts and rerouting one misplaced pharmacy delivery, Claire slipped into the hospital cafe for something warm. The space smelled like burnt espresso and powdered eggs, but the cinnamon rolls behind the glass looked promising. She ordered one and scanned the room, spotting a familiar figure in the back corner May Hollander, wrapped in a navy wool coat with an old scarf looped tightly around her neck. She sat alone at a table with mismatched chairs, folding her paper napkin with surgical precision. Claire hesitated, then approached. "Mind if I join you?" May looked up, her sharp blue eyes softening. "You're the doctor who caught me." "I am." May gestured at the empty seat. "Be my guest." Claire sat, her roll warm in its wax paper. They ate in silence for a minute, the only sounds the occasional hiss from the coffee machine and a gospel choir humming something that reminded Claire of Sunday mornings long ago. "You always fold napkins like that?" Claire asked. "Old habits," May replied. "My hands like order, even when the rest of me doesn't." Claire glanced at the creases in the napkin perfect triangles, crisp and deliberate. "Were you military?" she asked, nodding toward the precise folds. May hesitated. "A long time ago? Army Nurse Corps? Vietnam?" She took a sip of black coffee. "I lost someone there. Never really got over it." Claire didn't ask who. Some wounds didn't need prodding. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. May gave a half shrug. "We all carry things." Claire looked down at her own hands. They'd saved people, failed others. Now they rested over something growing quietly inside her that she still hadn't told a soul beyond Lena. She walked home alone that evening, the drizzle soaking into her coat, fog rising from the grates as street lamps blinked on. Her hand kept drifting to her belly, an unconscious gesture that now felt more like instinct than choice. Back in her apartment, she tried again. She pulled out a sheet of paper and started to write, "Graham, I didn't plan for this." She stared at it for a long moment, then she crumpled the page and dropped it into the trash. Not yet. Maybe not ever. The next morning, at her OB appointment, the lights were soft, the doctor gentle but efficient. Claire lay on the exam table, the sound of the ultrasound machine filling the room with small mechanical whirs. Then came the pause. The doctor tilted her head slightly, adjusting the wand. Her brow furrowed. Claire's heart skipped. "Is something wrong?" "No, not wrong," the doctor said slowly. "But—" She turned the screen slightly toward Claire and smiled. "There's more than one heartbeat, two tiny lives, one heart torn in two directions." Claire sat in the dimmed ultrasound room, her pulse louder than the monitor. The soft thump-thump of two separate heartbeats filled the space, like distant waves coming ashore in tandem. "Dr." Lynn moved the wand gently across Claire's belly, her expression focused but calm. "They're measuring well for this stage," she said, tapping keys with steady fingers. "But with twins, especially for someone with your workload, we'll need to keep a close eye." Claire blinked at the screen. Two shapes, two flickers, two... She'd come in hoping for reassurance. Instead, she'd gotten multiplication. "I didn't even plan for one," she murmured, more to herself than the doctor. "Doctor..." Lynn gave her a moment, then gently handed over a folded printout of the scan. "You're strong, Claire, but this isn't the time to be a hero." Long shifts, skipped meals, that catches up fast, especially now. Claire nodded slowly. "I hear you. Good. Let them be your excuse to rest." The doctor smiled as she stood, leaving Claire alone for a few moments to dress. Claire touched the spot on her belly where the wand had pressed. She wasn't showing yet, not really. But something inside her had changed shape entirely. Outside, Charleston's late January sky had turned a tired gray. Rain misted the sidewalks and gathered in shallow puddles. The breeze smelled faintly of river and earth, hinting at spring before it had fully arrived. Back at her apartment, Claire slipped off her shoes and curled onto the couch. The scent of lavender and peppermint hung in the air from the candle burning low on the windowsill. On the table sat her breakfast leftovers, a half piece of cornbread, and a cold cup of tea. She didn't have the appetite to reheat either. She noticed the package just as she reached for a blanket neatly wrapped in brown paper, with her name written in thick, graceful cursive. May Hollander, she thought immediately. No one else used a fountain pen. She unfolded the wrapping slowly. Inside was a small knitted baby blanket in pale cream, soft to the touch. At the center, hand-stitched with delicate care, were 5 simple words: "You are already enough." Claire stared at the message. Throat tight, no card, no explanation. Just quiet understanding, folded into yarn. Later that evening, she sat on the edge of her bed with the blanket in her lap, the ultrasound photo beside her. She reached for one of the medical journals she'd meant to finish and opened to an article on neonatal lung development. She read it aloud, slowly, letting the sound of her voice fill the quiet apartment. At first, it felt silly, but as she continued, something softened inside her. She imagined the twins, those tiny, flickering heartbeats listening. "You're not surprises," she whispered at last. "You're reasons." Her hand moved over the ultrasound image. She could do hard things. She'd always known that. But this would be her hardest. On the kitchen counter, a sheet of paper waited. She'd started letters before, torn them up, left them unsaid. But this time felt different. She picked up the pen. Graham, I wasn't going to tell you, but then today happened. And now, I think maybe you deserve the chance to choose for yourself. She wrote slowly, carefully. She told him the truth about the night, about the test, and about the two small lives growing faster than she was ready for. She didn't ask for anything, just offered the truth, wrapped in ink and care. When she finished, she folded the letter, slipped it into an envelope, and sealed it with a quiet exhale. Her fingers lingered at the edge for a moment before she stood. Outside, the sidewalk was wet, but the rain had stopped. The mailbox stood under a street lamp, its base surrounded by puddles, reflecting soft porch lights. She didn't pause. She seals the envelope and walks it to the mailbox. Claire had spent weeks holding her breath. It only took 2 days for the letter to reach him. In Graham Alden's Manhattan office, the afternoon sun reflected, off glass and steel, casting hard shadows across the sleek furniture. The envelope stood out like it didn't belong handwritten, slightly wrinkled, resting quietly on top of a stack of printed investor briefs. It didn't have a return address, but he knew the handwriting. His name was written like someone had taken their time. He stared at it for a long moment, long enough that his assistant poked in and reminded him about the 3 p.m. call. He waved her off. When the door closed, he slid a finger beneath the flap and opened it slowly, like he might break something delicate. The letter was simple, clear. Claire's voice echoed through each line, honest, unsure, but steady. She hadn't asked anything of him, only told him the truth, about the night, about the babies, twins. His hand trembled slightly as he lowered the paper. For a while, he said nothing at all, just sat at his desk, with the letter unfolded before him, like a page from a book he hadn't known he was in. Outside his office window, the city moved on, unaware, down in Charleston. Claire sat on her porch with a chipped mug of peppermint tea. The wind chimes above her door clinked lazily, catching the first warm breeze of early spring. Her porch smelled like damp wood and lavender, and the hydrangeas by the step were starting to stir green again. Same porch, same tea, huh, Doc, called Mr. Riley, the old postman, tipping his hat as he passed. Claire smiled. Routine builds trust. He chuckled and walked on, his cart creaking behind him. She watched the street for no reason other than habit now. The letter was gone, sent, done. She had released it like a breath she didn't realize she'd held. There was no controlling where it landed. Back in New York. Graham sat quietly in his chair, turning the ultrasound photo Claire had enclosed over in his hand. 2 small figures, blurry but real. He felt like the walls had pulled back, and the office around him didn't quite fit anymore. A knock at the door. His father stepped in without waiting. "I need you on that investor call from Seoul," Thomas Alden said, briskly, not noticing or caring that his son didn't answer right away. "I'm not doing it," Graham said simply, folding the letter and placing it gently in a drawer. Thomas paused. "Excuse me, I'm not flying out next week. Postpone it." Thomas narrowed his eyes. "This is what happens when you get distracted by sentiment." Graham looked up, tone still calm. "This isn't sentiment. It's life." His father scoffed and left. Graham stood and walked to the framed photo on his shelf, his mother, arms crossed in front of a backyard garden, wearing her nurse's scrubs. She'd always told him, love wasn't something you planned for. It was something you showed up for. He reached for his coat, Claire spent the next day back at the hospital, trying not to listen for footsteps that wouldn't come. Her patients blurred together sprained ankles, coughs that wouldn't quit, a minor burn from a microwave, burrito mishap. Life, relentless as ever. Lena found her just after 6, eating crackers from a vending machine near the break room. "You look like you slept in a laundry basket," Lena said. "I probably did," Claire replied. "You do know you're allowed to be scared." "Right, I'm not scared," Claire said, then caught herself. "Okay, maybe I am. But mostly I'm just trying to keep moving." "Well," Lena said, tilting her head toward the hallway, "you might want to pause." Claire frowned. "Why?" "Because there's someone waiting for you by the east wing. He's holding lilies, and he's soaked." Claire felt her heart thump, once hard. The hallway seemed longer than usual. When she turned the corner, there he was, standing near the window, his coat darkened with rain, his hair flattened in messy curls. In one hand, he held a modest bundle of white lilies, wrapped in the kind of brown paper you find at corner florists. He looked up. "I didn't know what to bring," he said, "but I knew I had to come." She stopped a few feet away, arms crossed, jaw tight. "I don't know if I'm ready to talk." Graham met her eyes, not moving closer. "Then let me wait until you are." Across a hospital cafeteria table, 2 lives sat trying to find a way back to the same page. It was just after 8:30 in the morning, and the cafeteria at St. Mercy had begun to stir with clattering trays, hissing steam, and the scratchy voice of a local radio host crooning a Sam Cooke classic. The scent of toasted bread and overworked coffee machines floated through the air. Claire stirred a packet of sugar into her tea. Across from her, Graham wrapped his hands around a plain white mug, his thumbs tracing the rim like he was thinking too hard about something simple. They sat at one of the small corner tables near the vending machines, brown plastic chairs, the kind that made every shift worker shift in discomfort. Between them was a space that felt bigger than the table. Their silence had always said more than their words until now. "I didn't know how to say it," Claire said finally, her voice quiet but steady. "I barely knew what to feel, let alone what to write." Graham nodded, eyes fixed on his cup. "I wasn't angry, just surprised, but not in a bad way." Claire looked up. "There's a good way to be surprised by twins." His mouth twitched. "Maybe not, but there's a right way to respond." She studied his face, tired, open, a little older than he had seemed 2 months ago. He looked like a man learning how to show up, even when he didn't have the answers. "I've been planning everything alone," Claire said, "budgeting for daycare, reading about secondhand cribs, making space in my 1 bedroom for 2 bassinets. You thought I wouldn't want to be part of it. I thought you wouldn't know how." Graham didn't argue. He looked down, then back up. Not really, but I want to learn." Across the room, a nurse laughed loudly at something her coworker said, breaking the tension for a moment. Claire picked up a piece of toast, tore it, and put it down again. "I don't want to need someone," she said. "Not when I've spent my life proving I can stand on my own. I'm not asking you to need me." Graham said softly, "Just let me walk beside you, if that's still possible." Claire didn't answer right away. Her eyes shifted to the far side of the room where May Hollander sat alone by the windows. The older woman's coat was wrapped tightly around her frail frame, despite the heat, and her skin looked paler than usual, but her eyes, sharp and steady, tracked everything. Claire watched as May opened a small notebook and wrote something carefully, her pen steady. Then, as if sensing eyes on her, May glanced up and offered a small nod. Graham followed Claire's gaze. Friend of yours? She's been teaching me things without realizing it. A pause. You know, Claire added, being a parent isn't just about biology. It's about showing up, even when it's inconvenient. Even when you're afraid. I'm here, he said. Claire gave him a slow nod. You are. Later that evening, as dusk settled over her apartment, Claire found a small, plush rabbit hanging from the doorknob. Its ears were lopsided, its stitched smile crooked, and there was a little card tucked beneath its arm. No note, no signature, just a small gesture left behind. She brought it inside, set it gently on her bookshelf beside a stack of prenatal vitamins, and sat down beside the window, breathing in the night air. Her phone buzzed with a message from Graham. Not rushing, just rooting. She held the phone for a moment, the edges warm from her hand. Down the hallway of the hospital, May stood up too quickly from her bench, her notebook slipping from her lap. A nurse passing by saw her stagger, then stop completely. Claire had just returned for a night consult when she heard the commotion. May she called, rushing forward. The older woman collapsed to the floor, her lips pale, pulse barely there. Claire dropped to her knees beside her and shouted down the corridor. We need a crash cart now. May lay still. Wires and beeping machines surrounding her, yet her presence still filled the room. The steady hum of monitors, the soft puff of the oxygen line, and the rain whispering against the high ICU windows made the world feel suspended in gray. Claire sat curled in a plastic chair beside May's bed, her legs pulled up beneath her, chin resting on her hand. Her scrubs were wrinkled, her eyes dull with exhaustion. May's skin looked like parchment, pale and paper-thin, but her hand still curled tightly around a worn rosary, knotted wood beads, darkened by years of prayer and weathered hope. Claire watched the rosary shift ever so slightly with each shallow breath, and thought of something May had once said between bites of hospital cinnamon toast. Strong women don't always feel strong. They just keep going. Outside, the magnolia trees lining the hospital entrance swayed gently under the weight of budding blossoms, their white petals still furled tight against the cold drizzle. Claire didn't notice the soft footsteps until a warm cardboard scent reached her nose. Graham set a takeout bag on the floor beside her, then eased into the chair next to hers without saying a word. She looked at him, his hair slightly damp, raincoat draped over his arm, eyes tired but patient. Ham sandwich, he said quietly, and split pea soup. Claire gave a faint huff. That's oddly specific. Your nurse said you skipped lunch. Twice. She reached into the bag, unwrapping the sandwich, the warmth seeping into her fingers. You know how to show up quietly, she said, not looking at him. That matters. Graham didn't answer right away. He leaned forward, adjusting the tiny radio he'd brought earlier and placed on May's bedside table. It played low an old Carpenter's song drifting through the room like a half-remembered dream. She liked the 70s, he murmured. Claire's eyes softened. She told me once she danced barefoot to Fleetwood Mac. They sat in silence as the music played on. Eventually, Dr. Lynn stepped in, her coat damp from running between buildings. She checked Claire's chart on the tablet, her brows pulling together. Your blood pressure's climbing, she said gently. And you've had some swelling? Claire tried to wave it off. I'm fine. Just tired. I need you to rest, Dr. Lynn said firmly. You're 29 weeks with twins and still working emergency shifts. Graham straightened. Is she okay? She needs monitoring, Doctor, Lynn said. I'm admitting her upstairs for at least 48 hours. Just precautionary for you and the babies. Claire opened her mouth to protest, then stopped. Her body felt like a house settling under too much weight. She nodded. Back in the hospital bed, in a quieter ward, just a floor above May, Claire watched the rain through narrow blinds. Graham sat beside her, not speaking, just slowly rubbing small circles on her back when her muscles tensed. His hand was steady, warm. She drifted off like that, to the sound of distant thunder and the low hum of the room. In her dream, she was standing in her childhood kitchen. The table was too big, the linoleum floor faded. Her mother stood by the sink, drying her hands on a yellow dish towel, just as Claire remembered her from a decade ago, alive and smiling. The way she'd been before the cancer took her voice. You don't have to do this alone, her mother said, reaching over to brush a damp curl from Claire's face. I'm trying, Claire whispered. I know. She woke with a sharp intake of breath, eyes blinking fast to anchor herself back in the room. The dream had been brief, but it settled in her chest like something permanent. The door opened. Dr. Lynn stepped in, clipboard in hand, her expression composed but serious. Claire, she said quietly, glancing at the monitor, the babies are coming. The storm outside roared, but inside the OR, new heartbeats prepared to greet the world. Rain lashed against the windows like it had something urgent to say. Charleston's streets shimmered with water, the gutters full, wind bending the magnolia branches like dancers too long on their feet. Inside St. Mercy, the power flickered once-twice before the generators hummed alive with their quiet, determined breath. Claire lay beneath the sterile lights of the emergency operating room, eyes closed, fists clenched at her sides. The world narrowed to beeping monitors, cool air brushing her forehead, and the steady murmur of Dr. Lynn's voice above her. Her contractions had come fast and hard. There was no more time. Graham stood beside her, gloved hand wrapped tightly around hers. His other hand trembled slightly, but didn't let go. Claire turned her head to him, face pale with pain. I'm scared, she whispered. He leaned close, voice low and even. My mom used to say I came into the world during a hurricane. Born in a little clinic with no power, in a town with one doctor and a radio that barely worked. Claire let out a shaky breath. Sounds familiar. She always said the storm passed, and I was worth the wait. Claire nodded once, then closed her eyes as another wave of pressure climbed through her spine. Dr. Lynn's voice was calm, but quick. We're ready? Claire, it's time. The hum of machines, the flicker of emergency lights, the smell of antiseptic and rain, everything wove together in the sharp, suspended moment before everything changed. A nurse adjusted the heart monitor, and Claire focused on the steady rhythm of her babies, 2 heartbeats, separate but in sync, like a duet reaching its crescendo. Then came the silence, then the first cry, loud, defiant, alive. Claire opened her eyes just enough to see Dr. Lynn lift, a tiny body, wrinkled and red-faced, squirming under the lights. Baby 1, Dr. Lynn said. Strong cry, good color. A second later, the second baby followed smaller, quieter. No cry, just movement. A tiny hand reached instinctively and wrapped around the nurse's finger with a grip that startled the room. He's holding on tight, someone whispered. Graham laughed under his breath, then choked on it. Claire turned her head toward the sound and saw tears in his eyes. His hand covered his mouth, She'd never seen him cry before, not in the weeks of tension, not during the letter, not even when she'd told him about the pregnancy. But now, he wept openly. She found his hand again. "Are they okay?" she whispered, voice hoarse. Graham nodded, voice broken with relief. "They're perfect." Her eyes fluttered shut. Down the hall, May Hollander stirred. Her bed had been moved earlier that evening to a quieter room. But the news of the emergency had reached her somehow through whispered nurse updates and soft-footed steps past her door. Now. A nurse wheeled her slowly into the hallway outside the OR. Rain tapped against the tall windows as she watched the activity beyond the double doors. When the nurse tried to roll her away, May lifted a hand. "Just let me see," she said softly. A moment later, she caught a glimpse of Claire, exhausted but alive, being wheeled toward recovery. Graham walked beside the bed, his hand resting lightly on Claire's arm, whispering something only she could hear. May's eyes filled with something deep and old. "Tell her she did good," she said. Back in the recovery wing, Lena was waiting with towels and clean blankets. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. A message, "May bring the envelope," for Graham. After, she reached into her bag, where a plain sealed envelope had been tucked for weeks. No name on the front, only one word, written in May's careful cursive. After. The envelope held no money, just meaning. Graham sat quietly on the park bench, his elbows resting on his knees. The letter from May warm in his hand, despite the cool April breeze. The grass around him was dotted with picnic blankets, families enjoying the first real spring day Charleston had offered in weeks. Near the edge of the green, beneath a magnolia tree just beginning to bloom, Claire laid out a soft quilt, with the twins beside her, William swaddled tight and fast asleep, Theo staring at the filtered sunlight like he was memorizing the sky. Graham opened the envelope slowly. May's handwriting was familiar, each stroke deliberate and sure. "Graham, I never meant to stick around this long, but life doesn't follow instructions, and neither does kindness. By the time this reaches you, I'll be gone. But before I go, I want you to know a few things. I was a combat medic in Vietnam. After that, a doctor. I stitched up soldiers and strangers for nearly 40 years, but people only remember me as the woman with the coat and the cane. Claire didn't see me that way. She offered me coffee, sat with me at lunch, asked about my day without blinking at my silences. She made me feel human again. So, I'm leaving what little I have. To those boys William and Theo. It's not much, but it's enough to start a college fund, or buy books, or build a tiny library of their own. Call it the Kindness Fund. You don't need to tell them it came from me. Just tell them it came from someone who believed in second chances. You and Claire gave me something to hold on to, a reason to stay just long enough. M.A. By the time he finished reading, Graham's throat had gone dry. He stared at the words, at the clean way they folded, meaning into silence. No grand gesture, just a small truth, handed forward. He folded the letter, carefully, like something sacred. Behind him, the rustle of footsteps on grass. Claire appeared with one twin in her arms, the other gently cradled in a wrap across her chest. Her hair was pulled back, with a loose scarf, and her fingers smelled faintly of baby lotion and cornbread. "She wrote it for you," she said softly. Graham nodded. She left more in that letter than some people do in a lifetime. They sat down together on the bench, the boys nestled between them. The magnolia branches overhead shifted gently in the breeze. A bloom had fallen beside Graham's foot, white, full. fragrant. "I've been carrying something too," he said, reaching into his coat. He didn't get on one knee. There was no speech, no audience. He just held out a small velvet box, worn at the corners, and opened it. Inside was a simple gold band, delicate and thin, the kind of ring that had weathered dishwater and garden soil, not red carpets or diamond counters. "It was my mother's," he said. "She wore it every day for 33 years. I kept it in a drawer too long." Claire's eyes didn't widen. She didn't cry. She just reached out and touched it with a fingertip, as if recognizing something familiar in its quiet weight. "I'm not afraid anymore," she said, and slid the ring onto her finger. A week later, the four of them stood beneath the same magnolia tree, joined by a small circle of friends. Lena brought a peach cobbler. The hospital staff brought casseroles and cards. Even Thomas Alden came, his suit wrinkled but clean, and his handshake with Graham was firm, if still a bit awkward. On a makeshift easel near the picnic table, they posted a photo of May Hollander, young, in uniform, standing beside a tent hospital in a jungle. Next to it, a second photo, taken just months before, of her folding napkins in the hospital cafe with a knowing smile. Beneath the photos was a printed plaque, the Kindness Fund, in honor of Dr. May Hollander, for William and Theo and those who will come after, because quiet kindness changes everything. That evening, the twins were especially fussy. Claire hummed old hymns while rocking them gently. Barefoot on the rug Graham's mother had given them years ago, but never unpacked. Graham sat across the room, assembling a second-hand bookshelf, screwing in the last panel with a muttered curse and a laugh. "You know," Claire said, as she finally laid Theo down in the crib beside William. "They came from a wild night." Graham looked up. She smiled, watching the boys settle. But they made this a quiet home. Outside the window, the magnolia tree bloomed in full, petals pale and wide as open hands. And for the first time in a long while, everything was still. In the soft bloom of a Carolina spring, two quiet babies slept under magnolia shade, never knowing how many lives had shifted to make space for their own. What began as an unlikely meeting turned into a legacy of quiet bravery, of showing up even when words fell short. Sometimes it's not the grand gestures, but the simplest acts, offering a coat, a hand, a quiet presence that change everything. When we stop judging by appearances, we start to see what truly matters. Like a porch light left on for someone making their way home. Kindness doesn't call attention to itself, yet it always finds a way back. And if this story lingered in your heart, perhaps it's because, somewhere in your life too, someone once waited for you, without needing you to be ready. Thank you for spending time with this story. If it touched your heart or reminded you of someone you cherish, please consider giving it a like, sharing it with a friend, and subscribing to our channel. At Shining Stories, every click helps us spread a little more kindness in a world that deeply needs it. Your support means more than you know.